The fleet materialized 8,000 kilometers from a war it hadn't known it was fighting. For half a second, nothing happened. Then General Marcus Harmon watched the threat display fill with red. "Range check," he said. His voice didn't shake. 12 ships, 6,000 crew, a Veil orbital force that had never lost a battle in 4,000 years and didn't yet know it was under fire. "Inside their envelope, sir," Rays called from tactical. "We're closer than anything they've ever fought." The Veil flagship sensors woke up a full second too late. On the bridge of the Resolute, Harmon gave the order in 4 words. "Fire the forward battery." A 3-ton rod of tungsten and osmium left the rail gun at 90,000 kilometers a second. It crossed the gap before the Veil commander finished turning his head. Where the flagship's gravitic lance array had been, there was now a hole with fire around the edges. Not damaged, erased. Commander Vechnar had 4 seconds to understand what his civilization had gotten wrong. 11 years earlier, a signal arrived that no one heard. The blended CTA settled into Harmon's mind like a stone dropped in still water. "We answer," he thought. "The question is how." He would say those words out loud soon enough. Right now, the only question that mattered was whether the enemy would break before his Marines hit the ground. 12 days into her guilty caffeine, 31 hours without sleep, Dr. Elena Vasquez was 3,000 miles away from all of this, in a different year, staring at a green box on a monitor that said pattern confirmed. 99.97%. She didn't know yet that she'd just found a war. The Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex sat in the Mojave at 2 in the morning, quiet except for the hum of cooling fans and the tick of a building settling in the cold. Vasquez's coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She hadn't touched it since. Her hands were trembling slightly on the keyboard, the way they always did when the pattern-matching software found something she couldn't yet explain. 11 years she'd spent chasing anomalies in old data. Most were nothing. Solar noise, satellite chatter, cosmic ray hits misfiled as signal. This one wasn't nothing. The algorithm had flagged a gravitational wave packet, archived and forgotten in 2031, compressed so tightly that no automated relay had ever thought it worth a second look. 4 seconds of raw waveform folded into a mathematical whisper. She ran it through the Vorath dialect library she'd built alone, on her own time, because everyone else thought it was a waste of a linguist's career. The translation scrolled across her screen, 1 line at a time. Colony World Cath 9 under attack. Enemy designation, the Veil. Population, 14 million. Military assets depleted. Requesting aid from all allied civilizations. We are. Nothing. The line ended there. Not because the message was finished, because whoever sent it had stopped being able to finish it. Vasquez sat very still. Outside, a coyote called somewhere out past the antenna field, and she barely heard it. She picked up the satellite phone and dialed a number she'd been given for emergencies only 4 years ago and never used. Harmon answered on the 3rd ring, gravel-voiced with sleep. "This better be good, Doctor." "I found something," Vasquez said, "and I think we've been at war for 11 years without knowing it." There was a long pause on the line. She could hear him sit up. "Say that again." She told him. The signal, the translation, the date stamp, 2031, the same year Earth had first made contact with the Vorath, back when humanity's entire off-world presence was 3 experimental ships and a lot of hope. She told him the packet had been small enough that nobody had ever been required to look at it, and that it had sat in a government archive for over a decade, waiting for someone stubborn enough to keep looking. "Get in your car," Harmon said. "Bring everything. I'm calling the council." The Colorado bunker held 27 people at 4 in the morning, most of them badly dressed and half awake, none of them happy about it. Vasquez stood at the front of the room with a cold coffee cup she'd brought out of habit and forgotten to put down, and she told them what 11 years of silence had cost. "The Vorath called for help," she said. "They called for us specifically, because they believed the alliance meant something before we'd ever tested it, and we didn't answer, not because we said no, because we never heard the question. A council member near the back, grey suit, tired eyes, the kind of man who'd spent 30 years finding reasons to wait, cleared his throat. Doctor, with respect, we don't know if Cath 9 even still exists. We don't know troop strength, enemy capability, distance, logistics. We're not considering a response, Harmon said, cutting through it flat and final. We're planning one. The room went quiet. Colonel Diana Reyes stood up from the corner she'd been leaning in. She hadn't said a word until now. If we're doing this, we do it right. We don't fight the Veil at the range they expect. She pulled up a projection, a fold space emergence point plotted absurdly close to a target system, closer than any tactical doctrine on record would recommend. We come in at 8,000 kilometers, inside their defensive envelope. Their lance arrays are built for long engagement. They've never had to defend point blank because nobody's ever been stupid or fast enough to try it. That's suicide range for us too, someone said. It's suicide range for them, Ray said. We survive it. They don't expect to need to. Harmon looked at the projection for a long moment, then at Vasquez, then at the room. Build it, he said. We leave in 4 days. The fleet left Earth orbit on a grey morning that nobody who watched it would forget. 12 ships, 6,800 crew, 4,000 Marines in cold sleep, dreaming nothing, carried toward a fight they hadn't chosen and would answer anyway. Harmon watched the planet shrink from the Resolute's observation deck, hands behind his back, and thought about how strange it was that Clarity could feel this heavy. 14 days into the fold space transit, a signal came through the long-range array, old, damaged, looping every 90 seconds like it had been running on repeat since the moment it was recorded. Vasquez, brought along as the only qualified Vorath translator humanity had, sat with headphones pressed to her ears in a comms bay that smelled like recycled air and hot electronics, and listened to a voice that had been broadcasting into the dark for over a decade with no idea if anyone would ever hear it. If you come, the voice said, ragged and unmistakably alive, we will rise from the ground and meet you on the surface, and together we will show the Veil the site of their own retreat. Vasquez sat with that for a long moment before she keyed the comm to Harmon's quarters. There's someone still down there, she said, and she's been waiting. 3 decks below, in a bunk barely wide enough for his shoulders, Corporal James Ocaffer heard the recording piped through the general announcement and lay still in the dark. He thought about his sister, about a Christmas 6 years ago, and an argument he'd never gotten to finish, about the number 6 million and what it meant that he couldn't picture it, not really, not as people. He reached over, picked up his helmet from the shelf beside his bunk, and set it in his lap. He didn't put it on yet. He just held it, running his thumb along the seam where the visor met the shell, the way he always did before something that mattered. Outside, the ship's clock ticked toward arrival, and none of them yet knew that in less than a day the Veil would learn exactly what it meant to underestimate a species that had never once needed to prove how far it would go. The 4 seconds ran out. Vechnar had time to give one order, evasive, full reverse, before the second railgun round hit the flagship's port hull and kept going, straight through 3 decks and out the other side. The ship didn't explode. It just stopped answering. On the Resolute's bridge, Harmon watched the Veil formation do something no tactical model had predicted. It didn't return fire in an organized pattern. It scattered. They're not maneuvering, Ray said, disbelief flat in her voice. They're panicking. They've never been hit first, Vasquez said quietly, from the jump seat she'd been given at the back of the bridge. In 4,000 years, nobody's ever gotten a shot in before they did. Harmon didn't answer. He was already moving to the tactical display, watching 6 more Veil ships try to form a defensive line and fail, because a defensive line assumed you had time to build one. Second wave, he said. Raise, get your people in the air. 200 assault shuttles broke from the fleet's belly and screamed down through Cath 9 violet atmosphere, and Ray's rode the lead one with her jaw locked and her hands steady on the harness. Below her, the planet unspooled, agricultural terraces cut into red hills, cities with their lights dark, the long straight scars of what had once been roads and were now just gaps in the vegetation where nothing grew back. 14 million people had lived here. She didn't know yet how many still did. The shuttle bay doors opened at 200 feet, and her Marines went down the ropes into a plaza surrounded by buildings pocked with weapons fire, old enough that moss had grown into the scarring. Veil ground troops were already moving to meet them, angular and fast, their three-elbowed arms giving them a reach that looked wrong until you watched one use it to backhand a Marine 20 feet. Ray's hit the ground and didn't stop to think about the reach. She put 2 rounds into the nearest one's chest plate and kept moving. Half a mile away, in a service tunnel that had been converted into a resistance corridor sometime in the last decade, the ground under Admiral Tessevar's boots began to shake. She had heard the first impact from 400 feet down. She had felt the second one in her teeth. And now, for the first time in 4,000 days, she reached up and unlatched the hatch above her head, sealed since before some of the fighters standing behind her had been born, and let sunlight into the tunnel. It hurt her eyes. She didn't care. Up, she said in Old Vorath, to the 8 million who had spent 11 years learning how to survive underground and had never once stopped preparing to come back up. They came. Now we rise. The plaza fighting had been going for 6 hours when Okafor took a gravitic burst square in the chest plate. It spun him sideways into a collapsed wall, and for a second the world was just white noise and the taste of copper. He lay there long enough to register that his ribs were probably cracked, that his HUD was flashing amber warnings he didn't have time to read, and that somewhere to his left, Vorath fighters were pouring up out of the ground like the earth itself had decided to join the war. He got up. He didn't remember deciding to. His legs just did it, the way training does things a mind that still catching up hasn't agreed to yet. A Veil soldier turned toward him, weapon raised, and Okafor put him down before the shot cleared the barrel. Report, Ray's voice crackled in his ear, tight with the sound of her own fight going on somewhere behind it. I'm up, Okafor said, still moving. He didn't tell her about the ribs. There wasn't time, and it wouldn't have changed anything either of them was about to do. By hour 9, the plaza had gone quiet in the specific way a battlefield goes quiet, not peace, just the absence of anyone left willing to keep fighting. The last Veil ground commander's transmission came through on an open channel, translated a half-second late by the field unit strapped to Ray's wrist. We surrender, unconditionally, cease your advance. Ray's lowered her weapon slowly, the way you do when your body doesn't quite trust the order yet. Around her, one by one, her Marines did the same. Somewhere behind them, Vorath fighters who had trained their whole adult lives for exactly this outcome stood in a plaza they hadn't seen sunlight in for 11 years, and didn't move either, like stillness was its own kind of disbelief. Vasquez, patched into the fleet-wide channel from the Resolute, heard the surrender go out and felt something in her chest that wasn't relief, not yet. It was closer to arithmetic. 6 million dead before the fleet ever arrived. 8 million still alive because the packet had finally been heard. She thought about the number for a long moment and didn't say it out loud. Harmon, beside her, watched the tactical display go still. No more red icons moving, no more Veil formations trying to reorganize into a fight their doctrine had never prepared them for. He picked up the fleet-wide channel himself. All units hold position, he said. We came for a reason. Let's not forget it in the last hour. 300 miles above the plaza, on a Veil transport already braking for high orbit ahead of the surrender order, a junior officer sent a single encrypted burst toward the Veil homeworld, 11 years away at light speed, meaning nobody there would hear it until long after the officer sending it was dead of old age. It was a data packet, not a message. Battle telemetry, sensor logs, the kind of thing nobody back home would read for over a decade. Buried inside it, unremarkable among the hull breach reports and casualty counts, was a single tactical note that the transmitting officer hadn't thought twice about attaching. Enemy fired first. We had no warning window. Recommend full reassessment of underestimated species. He didn't know it yet, but that line, 4 seconds of transmission time, easy to miss, was going to be the most expensive sentence in his civilization's 4,000-year history. On the ground, Ray's keyed her comm one more time, scanning the plaza for stragglers, for wounded, for anyone still standing who needed picking up. Instead, at the far edge of the square, past a collapsed fountain and a line of Vorath fighters blinking against the daylight, she saw a single figure walking toward the human line, unarmed, slow, deliberate, and realized it was Tessevar herself, and that the resistance leader who had spent 11 years underground planning for a single day was now walking straight toward the humans like she intended to say something that couldn't wait. Rays didn't lower her weapon. She didn't raise it either. She just watched her come. Rays didn't lower her weapon. Tessevar stopped 6 feet away, hands open at her sides, and spoke first, in English rough enough that the translator on Ray's wrist barely needed to work. "You came," Tessevar said. 11 years you came." "We came," Ray said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't triumph either. It was just true. Tessevar's eyes, dark, unblinking, still adjusting to light she hadn't seen in over a decade, moved past Ray's to the plaza behind her, to the Marines standing among Vorath fighters who didn't yet know how to stand in open air without flinching. "My daughter did not live to see this," she said. "She was 6 when the veil landed. She believed you would come before I did." She said it plainly, without asking for anything back, and then she turned and started walking toward the wounded, because there was work to do and grief could wait its turn. Rays watched her go and didn't trust herself to say anything. Harmon got the report an hour later, patched through from the ground team while he stood on the Resolute's bridge watching the last scattered Veil ships limp toward the system's edge, unpursued. Cath 9 ground forces had surrendered. The sky was, for the first time in 11 years, empty of anything hostile. It didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like the moment before you're allowed to put something down. Sir, Ray's second-in-command was standing at the bridge threshold, out of breath from the shuttle ride up. "We took a prisoner, ground commander. He wants to talk to whoever's in charge." Harmon looked at Vasquez, who was still in the jump seat she'd claimed hours ago, translation software open on her lap, eyes red from 30-some hours without sleep now stacked on top of a battle. "You up for this?" "I've been up for worse," she said and stood. The prisoner was brought to a secure hold 2 decks down, Commander Vechna, the same officer who'd had 4 seconds to understand his civilization's mistake and had somehow survived his flagship's destruction by being on the ground when it happened. He was smaller than Harmon expected. Angular, chitinous, one arm bound in a medical wrap that didn't quite fit human first aid supplies, but had been made to work anyway. He hadn't spoken since capture. He spoke now. "You do not understand what you have done," Vechna said, through Vasquez's translation, his voice a low, subsonic pulse that the equipment converted into something almost like words. "Cath 9 was a garrison world, 4th priority. What you destroyed here is nothing to the Dominion." Harmon didn't flinch. "Then why send 4,000 troops to hold it?" Vechna's eyes, fixed and lidless, didn't move. "Because we did not think anyone was coming." The room went quiet. Vasquez felt the trembling return to her hands, the same tremor from the night in Goldstone, and understood it now for what it was, not exhaustion, but the particular feeling of watching a shape resolve out of noise. "The real question," Vechna went on, "is not what happens to me. It is what happens when Central Command hears that a species 4,000 years younger than us fired first and won." He said it like a warning, not a threat. "We have never had to answer that question before. I do not know what the answer will be. Neither do they, not yet." Harmon held his gaze for a long moment. "Good," he said. "Let them wonder." 3 decks up, in a triage bay that had been converted out of a cargo hold, A medic finally got Okafor's chest plate off and found what she'd expected. 2 cracked ribs, deep bruising, the kind of injury that should have put him on his back 6 hours ago. "You walked around on this," she said. "Didn't have time to sit down," Okafor said, and let her wrap the bandage without complaint, staring at the middle distance the way he'd stared at his helmet the night before arrival. He wasn't thinking about the ribs. He was thinking about a woman he'd seen from a distance during the fighting. Old, grey-skinned, kneeling beside a fallen Vorath fighter in a doorway, not moving even as shots passed close enough to scorch the wall beside her. He didn't know who she'd lost. He hadn't had time to ask, but he'd remembered her face, and he wasn't sure why it had stuck. The medic finished the wrap and told him to rest. He nodded and didn't. The transmission that would matter most left Cath 9, orbit 2 hours after the surrender, riding on a junior Vale officer's data burst that nobody on either side thought was significant at the time. It joined the earlier telemetry packet, already crawling across 11 light-years of dark space toward a homeworld that wouldn't hear any of it for over a decade. Buried in the new burst, alongside casualty figures and a garbled account of the ground engagement, was one additional line, added almost as an afterthought by an officer who hadn't slept in 2 days and didn't know he was writing the sentence that would end 4,000 years of certainty. Recommend immediate reassessment of the Dominion's threat models for emerging species. We were wrong about what young means. Nobody on the Resolute knew that line existed. It would be 11 years before it landed anywhere that mattered, and by then the war would already be a memory instead of a wound. But it was in motion now, unstoppable, the way the original distress call had once been in motion, small, easy to miss, carrying more weight than its size should have allowed. Vasquez didn't know about the burst. What she knew, standing on the observation deck with a fresh cup of coffee she still hadn't drunk, was that the fighting had stopped, and that somewhere down on the surface, 8 million people who'd spent 11 years underground were standing in open air for the first time, and that none of it undid the 6 million who weren't. She thought about that math for a long time, and didn't try to make it feel better than it was. Below her, Cath 9 turned slowly toward its sun. Dawn was still hours away on the surface, but from orbit you could already see the Terminator line creeping across the violet horizon, the first true daylight the planet's liberated half had seen without a war attached to it in over a decade. Harmon found her there, an hour later. "Council wants a full report inside 48 hours, he said. "Casualties, terrain, prisoner intel, all of it." "I'll write it," Vasquez said. She didn't look away from the window. "Marcus, that officer, Vechna, he wasn't lying about not knowing what happens next." "No," Harmon agreed. "I don't think he was." Neither of them said the rest of it out loud. That the war they'd just finished might only be the first chapter of a much longer one, and that somewhere 11 years away, a message was already traveling toward people who had never once, in 4,000 years, had to ask themselves what they'd do if they were wrong. Cath 9's sun cleared the eastern ridge 4 hours later, and the light that reached the plaza was violet gold, unfamiliar, the color of a sky humans hadn't grown up under. Okafor stood near the collapsed fountain where he'd last seen the grey-skinned woman kneeling. His ribs ached with every breath. He didn't sit down. She found him instead. She crossed the plaza slowly, the way Tessevar had crossed it hours before, and up close he could see what the distance hadn't shown him, how thin she was, how her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from 11 years of a body remembering how to move in open air. She carried something wrapped in cloth. She stopped in front of him and unwrapped it, a handful of pale flowers, the kind that grew wild through cracks in the plaza stone, the only color in a square full of scorch marks and rubble. She said something in Old Vorath. His translator caught maybe 40% of it. Enough. "You came." Okafor thought about his sister, about an argument 6 years old that he'd never gotten to finish, about the number 6 million and how it had never once felt like a number until this exact moment, standing in a foreign plaza holding someone else's flowers. "Sorry it took us so long," he said in English. She didn't understand the words. She understood the tone, the same way Reyes had understood Tessavar without needing the translator to work. She held the flowers out further, insistent, until he took them, and something in her face, not quite a smile, closer to relief that had been rationed too long to spend all at once, loosened. A field photographer caught the moment from 30 feet away, not knowing yet what it would become. It would run on every network on Earth within the week. It would be titled We Came. It would hang in the Defense Council lobby for the next 50 years, and nobody looking at it would know about the ribs, or the sister, or the 40%. They would just see a soldier holding flowers and understand. 11 years later, on a world so far from Cath 9 that its sun was invisible even in the deepest telescopes, the Vale High Admiral sat down to eat breakfast the way she had every morning of her long command. The same bowl, the same quiet room, the same small ritual of not thinking about work until the meal was finished. She finished the meal. Then she opened the report that had been waiting on her desk for 3 days because nobody below her wanted to be the one who delivered it. The telemetry from Cath 9 had finally arrived, carried across 11 years of dark space by light that didn't care how long anyone had to wait for it. Casualty figures, ground engagement logs, the junior officer's line about reassessing threat models for emerging species. And underneath it, appended by an analyst who had spent 3 days running the numbers because the first pass seemed impossible, a projection. If the species that had taken Cath back was given 5 years to build toward war, unopposed, the projection said the number of warships it could field was 800. The High Admiral read the number 3 times. She did not call anyone in. She sat at her desk for the length of time it takes a species with no word for retreat to consider, for the first time in 4,000 years, that advancing might not always be the answer. It took her a week to share the figure with her command council. When she finally did, she didn't frame it as a warning. She framed it as a fact, the way Vechnar had framed his own warning to Harmon in a cargo hold 11 years earlier, not knowing the two moments would echo each other across a decade of silence neither side could hear yet. "We have never lost territory voluntarily," she told the council. "We are going to start." The order went out within the month. Withdrawal from 3 border systems, not defeat, not retreat in the way their doctrine understood the word, but a recalibration nobody in 4,000 years had needed to make. Alongside the order, a diplomatic packet was drafted and sent toward the species that had answered a call nobody expected them to hear. 3 words, translated with more care than the Vale had ever spent on a message to anyone. "We acknowledge equals." Vasquez was the one who received it, 11 years and 4 months after the battle, still working out of Goldstone, though she'd long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. She read the message twice, then walked it down the hall to Harmon's office herself instead of sending it through channels, because some things deserved to be said out loud. "They want a response in a week," she said. Harmon looked at the message for a long moment. He'd gone grey since Cath 9, so had she. 11 years is too long to wait, Vasquez said, but 3 weeks reminds them we don't jump when they call. She set the packet down on his desk. "We come when we decide to come." Harmon almost smiled. He picked up the packet and didn't answer right away, and that was answer enough. That night, alone in the Goldstone archive room where it had all started, Vasquez pulled up a file she hadn't opened in 11 years. The original waveform, the 4 seconds of screaming static compressed into a gravitational whisper too small for any automated relay to flag as significant. She played it once, the raw sound before translation, before meaning, before any of it had become a war. It sounded like nothing, like noise, like exactly the kind of thing a tired system was built to ignore. She thought about what it meant that humanity had arrived too late to save the 6 million, but in time for the 8. The packet had waited 11 years in an archive nobody checked, patient in a way nothing designed by people usually managed to be. And someone had been awake to hear it. She closed the file. On the shelf above her monitor, unnoticed by anyone who ever walked into the room, sat a small clay pot holding a handful of dried violet flowers, pressed flat and kept long past when flowers usually last. Okafor had sent them to her months after Cath 9, with no note attached. She'd never needed one. Outside, the Mojave night was quiet, the way it always was at this hour, the way it had been the night she'd found the signal. She turned off the monitor. The room went dark except for the small red light of the archive drive, still running, still listening, the way it always had.